I'm David Hepworth. Thanks for clicking this Word in Your Ear podcast, videocast, thing for which there is no name. Mark Ellen and I have been creating in this line since 2007. And if any of it has met with your approval, then please click to subscribe because it helps. Leave a comment because we like to hear from you, and maybe even consider becoming a Patreon supporter because then, well, you'll be one of us. Visit patreon.com/wordinyourear for details.
You're listening to a podcast from The Word.
Welcome to another podcast. Dave is away with his bucket and spade in Spain. He's en route to the Alhambra Palace. So if you happen to be there today, go up to him and say, I claim my free copy of Ride a Hustler's Dream by Elmer Gantry's Velvet Opera. And he will pull one out of his bag because he always carries, doesn't he? He always carries several copies.
He does.
Just in case. And he might even sign it for you. Anyway, so your hosts today are our producer, Magic Alex Gold in the Midlands. Hello, Magic.
Hello.
And me, Mark Ellen in West London. We ought to start, Magic, with an event in Manchester on Wednesday night, which reminded me of something that happened in 2003, which I think we might have talked about before on the podcast, which is going to see the Dixie Chicks at the Shepherd's Bush Empire. We just launched Word magazine. And I went down to see them, and this was 9 days before the American troops invaded Iraq. And I remember this so vividly. Natalie Maines, lead singer, just as a kind of off-the-cuff remark. It wasn't a big statement. Just said, just so as you know, we're on the good side with you all. Said, we don't want this war, this violence, and we're ashamed that the President of the United States is from Texas. And as you remember that. It was just a massive story.
Yeah.
It's kicked off all over America. They were a huge mainstream act. They're a kind of country crossover act, and so quite a lot of their audience were right-wing, were Republicans, and they finished up having to do that. Do you remember they did that apology where they appeared naked on the cover of Entertainment Weekly covered in slogans?
And they ended up changing their name, didn't they?
Yeah, they did, yeah. Saddam's Angels, Proud Americans, all that free speech and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, they changed the name to the Chicks. It's all and their career never really covered. But the thing about that happened on Manchester, the Co-op, on Wednesday was really, really different because this was Bruce Springsteen saying something that was so direct and so explicit. I've never heard anything like it actually on stage.
Absolutely scathing.
Wasn't it incredible? It was just about any politician, and it was a speech basically that, as far as I can see, looking at the clip, he was reading it off an auto cue quite rightly because it was something he'd really
sat down and he
about
prepared,
and really chiseled and really prepared, and he wanted it to be transcribed and disseminated, And I think you've got the speech there, haven't you? Just read out the opening bit.
Okay, here's the opening bit. It's in my home. The America I love, the America I've written about, that has been a beacon of hope and liberty for 250 years, is currently in the hands of a corrupt, incompetent, and treasonous administration.
Phenomenal, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
That pulls no punches. Corrupt, incompetent, and treasonous administration. He goes on, he says, in America, the richest men are taking satisfaction in abandoning the world's poorest children to sickness and death. They're taking sadistic pleasure in the pain they inflict on loyal American workers. They're rolling back historic civil rights legislation. They're abandoning our great allies and siding with dictators against those struggling for their freedom. They're persecuting people for using their right to free speech and voicing their dissent.
And the next bit is a majority of our elected representatives have failed to protect the American people from the abuses of an unfit president and a rogue government.
It is just astonishing. He ends by just saying they have no concern or idea of what this means to be deeply American. The America I've sung to you about for 50 years is real, and regardless of its faults, it's a great country with great people. We'll survive this moment. I mean, I remember there was people making, statements about the Vietnam War, about local issues like Kent State Massacre, Bloody Sunday, whatever. This is the most outspoken thing. And he is supremely well qualified to do this. You remember he was in the Vote for Change tour in 2004 with Springsteen and R.E.M. and Tracy Chapman. He did that podcast not so long ago with Obama. He campaigned very, very publicly, very vigorously against Trump and for Harris before the last election. So I guess people were expecting him to respond, weren't they?
But I think the fact that this is a prepared speech and not an off-the-cuff remark made on stage. I mean, that's the real difference. I think the fact that he sat down, he's prepared this. Obviously he wanted it to land.
Oh yeah, completely. And it has. I mean, weirdly, because it hasn't landed much in America. America are not really picking up on this, and Trump has yet to respond, and he won't respond. He'd be wrong to respond as well, actually.
But do you think that's got anything to do? It's kind of expected of the boss because he's been, fighting the good fight for 50 years now. But also, do you think it's perhaps been overshadowed a little bit by the whole kneecap debacle? Because that's causing real uproar. And and the timing of this, it's kind of, the kneecap thing, I think, is still very much in the forefront of the debate at the moment. So Springsteen's kind of Springsteen's speech has been, I wouldn't say dulled by it, but it's opened a window for him to perhaps speak a little bit more freely with less consequences.
I don't think they're similar areas, actually. I think that's about a different kind of politics, and this is just broadly about what's happening in America. But I think there will be repercussions, and I don't know what they are really. It's interesting because, people don't like it when you talk about their country abroad. If a British act said something about Britain abroad, you'd be a bit peeved, actually. People don't like it, and he had to come here to say that. But I'd just be interested if there's any kind of response, and I think broadly his audience, his home audience, is mainstream white Americans, and a lot of those will be Trump supporters, and so he will lose a following. But I think he's got to that point of his life where he doesn't care. He's 75, and what he's interested now in is his legacy, really, isn't it? It's his reputation, it's his remaining true to all the things that he talked about. But I just wonder what will happen when he gets back. I don't know. Will there be any problems at the borders, or will there be any kind of repercussion? I'm not sure.
Of course, because you had that thing with the UK subs, didn't you, a few months ago, where they were denied entry into the States because they'd said something negative about Trump in the press. There's that level of activity going on. But I mean, do you think
and touring in every respect is so difficult anyway? Borders are difficult enough as it is, And at a slight tangent, there was a story that we were looking at the other day about 50 festivals being cancelled in Holland. Thinking, A, how astonishing that there are 50 festivals in Holland anyway. But B, the idea that no one was being able to forward book. Nobody dares, book ahead because they don't have the money, and a lot of the bands are finding it really hard to get there because traveling's so hard. So the whole world of touring has become so constricted.
The weird thing about Holland is it's got a bigger music scene entertainment scene actually than you'd think. I think, as far as I'm aware, pound for pound, sort of inch for inch, it's got the biggest concentration of theatres anywhere in the world. A friend of mine was in a Stones tribute band years ago, and they did it was a 10-week tour of the Netherlands, and they stayed in this camp in Nunspeet, somewhere in the middle of the country. Every single theatre they went to, they were busy every night for 10 weeks, pretty much, 1 day off a week. Every single theatre was within an hour and a half's drive. But pound for pound, they've got the highest concentration of theatres and venues, I think, of anywhere in the world. It's crazy. So it does feel a bit surprising.
Even more reasons to want to move to Holland. I love Holland.
Absolutely, yeah, me too.
I love Dutch people. I've never met a Dutch person I didn't like. It's fantastic. You get about on a bicycle. It's flat.
Yeah, it's even great for a bike ride. There are no hills. Easy.
It's just fantastic. No, but I'll be really interested to see what happens with this Springsteen thing, what the repercussions will be. But what really struck me was I don't remember anything in my lifetime as outspoken by any musician on stage about a politician. It's momentous and it's unprecedented. But Magic, on a lighter note, John Niven's play about Oasis and Blur, the rivalry story from 1995, The Battle,
God.
is going to be put on in London soon. I think this is really interesting.
Hooray.
John Niven, for anyone listening who doesn't know, John Niven he wrote a terrific book called Kill Your Friends, a lot of it based on the time that he was working in, I think it was in Decca Records, wasn't it, in the 90s?
Yeah.
At the high times of the music industry. A book that I think was described by Word magazine at the time as possibly the best British novel since Trainspotting.
Wow, high praise
John
indeed.
Niven, anyway, very, very funny writer, has written this play about the battle. I mean, do you remember that story? How old would you have been when that happened? In 1995?
God.
Blur v Oasis?
I'd have been 11 or 12.
Can you remember it?
I was just becoming aware of popular culture, and I wasn't immediately aware of the battle because at that point I didn't read the press. So any information I had got filtered through via my fellow students, the kids in the years above, and we gradually became aware of these bands called Oasis and Blur, and also via the school bus, which would play the radio every morning on the way to school. We weren't really aware of the politics of it until a little bit later, when we actively got into these bands. So that would be, probably a year down the line, 96, I'd say. But there was clearly a difference between the two. Blur had country house out, and to someone who wasn't quite yet in their teams, had this lovely kind of kaleidoscopic video with them all running around on a jape. And Blur just seemed a lot more fun than Oasis. So I suppose my first knee-jerk reaction to the whole thing was, "Oh, these guys look like they're interesting."
I'm with Blur.
Yeah, I'm a Blur man.
Siding with them.
And then I took up the drums and I started to get into the musical side of music, I suppose. And I became interested in Oasis, because their songs are really simple. Everybody knows that, of course. But once you're able to play them, it kind of makes you feel like a master, because they're really easy to become good at very quickly. And I remember sitting there one night with a guitar I'd borrowed from the school, and I taught myself the supersonic guitar solo. I hadn't yet learned to play the guitar, but I sort of figured out there are only so many frets and so many strings. And there were only so many times I could get it wrong. So I laboriously went over every single note until I found the notes. And by the end of the night, I'd learnt my first guitar solo. And that, I think, sealed the deal.
That's the way Noel Gallagher does it, I think. But
the way he still does it, probably.
Identical solo. He's worked out that's the solo. I'm not going to change this.
But then I became actively interested in finding out more about them in a way that I hadn't about Blur. And I'd started to discover the NME and Q Magazine and things like that. And there was this whole other layer to Oasis, and I found them to be, for someone who hadn't quite yet figured out who they were, like me as a 13-year-old, hadn't quite found my confidence, my stride. What they were saying, if you took away I sort of saw through all the bad behaviour, and I thought what at their essence, they were absolutely aspirational. And what Noel Gallagher was saying, he was quite clear that he wasn't work shy. But he was saying that we are here because we believe we deserve to be. We've put in the hours and we think we're really good because of it. And that sort of gave me a purpose. So I think I became really biased towards Oasis because of that. Blur were artists. They're a different breed, whereas Oasis had kind of punched their way to the top from the bottom. And that, to me, at that time was very, very attractive. And so from then on, I was an Oasis man through and through, I think. I suppose I've matured into believing that Blur were definitely the better band of the two. Well,
I just remember it as editing whatever. I think I might have been editing Select or something. I can't remember what I was doing at the time. Maybe it was Mojo. I can't remember. But I was anyway. I was I was involved. I was the managing editor of Select, and it was a huge story for them. And I can remember that who was going to win that battle was so important. In fact, Blur sold 274,000 copies and Roll With It sold 216,000. And Blur had brilliantly cheated by putting it out in two formats. The double CD single and a 7-inch vinyl single. The double CD had live versions of some other Blur songs and also a version of To The End featuring François Hardy. So it was really valuable. So people were buying both copies, which is brilliant. But I really remember it because it was the last great, correct me if I'm wrong, the last great one example of those kind of pop rivalries where the press engineer these battles. Elvis v. Cliff, Beatles v. Stones, Hendrix v. Clapton, Bowie v. Bolan, Clash v. Pistols, Duran v. Spandau Ballet, and suddenly it was Blur Oasis. And those were really commercial. You would drive those things furiously to divide your readership and to try and separate out their loyalties and get them to buy the publication. But can you think of, has there been another big rivalry since then? I don't think there has.
I think probably not. I mean, I think there's been a few in hip hop. They've sort of been and gone pretty quickly. I would suggest that the great pop rivalry sort of ended around the time the internet started. Because that was a point at which, in terms of pop culture, it was quite binary then, I think. You're either this thing or that thing, and that was it. But everybody now everybody since the advent of MySpace and all that kind of stuff has become a lot more eclectic. And so what you're missing now is these camps, because everybody's a little bit of everything. So, whatever does go on between...
You don't really get those tribes anymore, do you?
You don't. And the arguments need the tribes to sustain their significance.
Yeah, because with Blur and Oasis, the point is that they were both ubiquitous. They were on top of the pops, they were in the press, they were on the radio, there were the people on the streets, clothes, wearing certain clothes indicated a loyalty, and you just couldn't escape and say you had to have an opinion. And I'm not sure that really exists anymore now. Everything's fragmented, isn't it, into whatever TikTok feeds that can be enormous and they can be invisible to people on the outside.
Absolutely, and everything travels so fast, whereas things had time to land. Then I think you'd read about these things in queue, and you'd have to wait a month, to find out more. And even in terms of telly, you'd probably have to wait a week to find out the latest developments. So there was an element of tension and release there as well that there really isn't now, because everything's available really, really, really instantly, and it kind of softens it all, really. Yeah. And also, I just think people are a lot more polite. Bands are a lot more polite. The paradigm's changed. The rock stars aren't the rebels anymore. It's the builders and the bankers that are going out and staying up until 7 o'clock in the morning and causing all kind of havoc. It's not the bands. The bands are all vegans, like me, Mark. They're all mild-mannered vegans who go to the gym 3 times a week. So they're absolutely abjectly opposed to conflicts and argument. So I think that's another reason that you don't really get it anymore. But
John Niven's play is a play. It's not a musical. Which is interesting.
So there's no music in it at all.
No, well, there's going to be music. It'd be interesting to see what they have. There must be some kind of soundtrack.
Okay.
What that costs, I don't really know. But it's not a musical. But you have been in various musicals, because someone's got to play the part of Damon Albarn, someone's got to play the part of Liam Gallagher and etc. And you have played in various musicals and in tribute bands the parts of what? John Lennon, haven't you?
John Lennon.
Steve Marriott, I think. Keith
Richards. I've been all 4 Small Faces now.
All
and I think
4 Small Faces.
I'm probably the only person in the world who's been all 4 Small Faces. A dubious honour, with varying degrees of success, I have to say. But I've been...
Look, what I want to know is, if you were a cartoonist and you thought, I've got to do a sketch of John Lennon, you'd look for some idiosyncrasy, some signature, some characteristic that you could somehow express. So when you're playing the part of John Lennon on stage, what are the things that you have to do to appear Lennon-like?
John's all about the legs. The centrifugal concept of John Lennon is the bandy legs. That's kind of it with John. I feel Paul McCartney is a
You've got to squint too, because you haven't got your glasses on, you can't see anything.
You've got to squint, but if you're in a theatre, people can't really see you. So the main thing is the shape of the thing. Your shape is your legs are squat and bandy, and you bob up and down, and that's your John essentially. What you've got to do is capture the most instantly familiar aspect of a character at any given time, to the passing fan. I feel like Paul McCartney's quite a circular concept. people listening to this won't be able to see it, but I feel like drawing a circle with your finger while you're talking. You know, it's sort of,
That's right. Yeah.
and even your mouth's a circle. Paul McCartney is a circle. John Lennon is in the legs. Ringo's in the head, of course. That's the key aspect of Ringo.
Wobble your head. And George Harrison's the Liverpool leg. He's got one leg that kind of
the Georgie Shuffle.
The Georgie Shuffle is tapping a toe. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's one. The trick is pulling out one key thing about that particular character.
So Keith Richards.
Keith Richards is all about dipping down.
Right.
So what he does a lot is he ducks. He ducks an awful lot. As he strikes a chord, he'll duck down and he'll come back up again. And if you do that a lot, that's the essence of
Keith. People will believe it.
That's the essence of Keith, really. When I was playing Ian McLagan of the Small Faces, Carol Harrison, who wrote All or Nothing, she made me change my walk because she bless her, she told me I mince, which I probably do. And McLagan walked like the best way she could describe it, which is really good actually. She said you've got to imagine you're a terrier, you're a Jack Russell. You've got to walk like that. And that changed the whole thing because that walk informed how I would speak when I was walking. And so a lot of it's in the legs. I mean, Keith, if you're dipping down, you're using your legs. I feel like that, the most important aspect of any character is probably around the legs, and then you work your way up.
So Ronnie Wood, you've done Ronnie Wood?
Yeah, Ronnie Wood's quite similar to Keith. He sort of follows Keith's lead, and he's quite a dipper as well.
Once you've got the hair on, once you've got the wig on,
if you've got the barnet, and you've got the legs, you're fine, you know. But one aspect, that's all you need, because you're approximating. You don't need to get them down absolutely down pat. I mean, you would if it was a microscopic kind of filmic portrayal. But you're on stage, you're playing a gig. You just need that one thing.
On a Keith note, we ought to remember the fact that it's the 50th anniversary of one of the best examples of a really brief composition ever, which was written on the 6th of May and written in... I was thinking of this the other day because I interviewed Leonard Cohen. I was talking to him about writing songs, and he famously claimed to have taken 5 years to write Hallelujah. Clearly he wasn't working on it all the time for 5 years, but he said for 5 years he would go back to this thing, telling me about one session where he was at the Royalton Hotel in New York, and he was there just in his underpants on the carpet with a notepad and a pen, bashing his head on the floor trying to write these lyrics to Hallelujah. Eventually finished up with something in the region of 80 verses. How there would be 80 rhymes for Hallelujah, I don't know. But anyway, he did that. And they tell me he had this conversation with Bob Dylan. He was talking about how long it took him to write songs. And he asked Dylan about some song. I can't remember what it was now. I think it was Gates of Eden or so. He said, how long it taken? Dylan said, 10 minutes.
I love how you slip into the voice, that you just automatically slip into the voice.
And Laughing Len, he asked Laughing Len how long it took to write Hallelujah. He said 2 years, which is because a complete lie, because it was 5. He was so mortified and so upset. But anyway, the example I was going to mention, which is so brilliant, was when the Stones were touring in America in '65, and they were staying at the Fort Harrison Hotel in Clearwater in Florida. And Keith Richards used to sleep. You know this, I'm sure. He used to sleep with the cassette machine by his bed. And this also really interests me because if you're a songwriter, now it's different because, you know, we're all carrying a device in our pocket which would make it possible to record something instantly. But before that was possible, people used to really panic about the idea they were going to forget a song. I can remember meeting Elvis Costello's wife, his first wife, Mary, who lived around the corner from here, and she was telling us all about how he was constantly writing songs. They'd be in a taxi and he'd be humming away and he'd be trying to... And what he used to do is just to jump out of cars, go to a phone box, and he would ring his own number to get the answer phone to sing whatever it was that he had in his head into the answer phone machine so that when he got home, it would be there. Which I thought was really interesting. It's like that Christine McVie story about Christine McVie writing Songbird, you know, when she wrote Songbird in the middle of the night. And there was nothing in her apartment that could record anything. And she kind of wrote it down basically as music, but she didn't really write music. And so she just stayed up all night playing this song over and over and over again so she wouldn't forget it, and then jumped in a cab and went straight, while still humming it, straight to the studio, got an engineer to put a tape on and taped it. But anyway, Keith used to sleep with us, as you know, with this cassette beside his bed, and he woke up in the middle of the night with this idea for a riff, and then the next morning he woke up and thought, did I think of something? I can't remember. And he played the tape back, and he's just so brilliant. He said it was the riff 3 times, da dam, da dam, da dam, da dam, and then he said 40 minutes of snoring, which is brilliant because that's basically the song. There are a couple of other chords, and obviously there's a lyric that Mick Jagger put in, a brilliant lyric, but that's broadly what the song's about. It was fantastic. And then what I love about it is the speed in which it was done. It was written on the 6th, and then they first recorded it at Chess Studios, I think in Chicago, on the 10th, and didn't like the version of it. Brian played harmonica, and they just didn't think it was quite right. And so 2 days later, they re-recorded it at RCA in Hollywood, and he had this gadget. He had a new gadget. Keith had a new gadget, which is the Maestro fuzz box, which he wanted to try out as a way of reminding him that when the fuzz box played, that's where the horns were going to be. He was going to put horns in later. And don't guitarists love a gadget, Magic? I mean, you've got a new gadget, you've got to use it. And he had this fuzz box. He had a fuzz box, he was going to use it, in fact.
It does make a difference, though. I mean, I don't know if you've seen that brilliant clip by Bill Bailey where he sort of deconstructs the edge.
Oh, it's fantastic. He reduces the U2 orchestra to some kind of plunky plonk thing. Does it? It's a power failure, isn't it? And all the gadgets break down. It's him playing some little folk jingle, isn't it?
It's fantastic, but it starts off playing this wide scream U2 soundscape, and by the end of it, he's playing exactly the same thing, but it sounds like a bit of dental floss being pinged by a squirrel, you know. But it's a really good example of how pedals and effects do make a difference. And if that Satisfaction riff would have been played clean, it would have just sounded completely flimsy, and it wouldn't have had anywhere near the impact it had.
But also, I love the idea they played it back, and basically all the band, particularly Andrew Oldham, all the band said, that's a hit. Put it out. And Keith was desperate to re-record. He said, he needs horns, it needs that and the other. So it just proves that a lot of the time you need somebody outside of the group, particularly in this case Oldham, who can hear its commercial potential and not caught up in the gadgets and your attitude to it as an insider.
Oh, 100%.
It's amazing. That record really helped immortalize the Stones. I can remember when it first came out, it was a whole new sound, which is it was a riff. It wasn't really a song, it was just a riff. And the lyric of that song is so amazing. I remember being thrilled by it. It's very sophisticated lyric. It's about America. It's about how loose and how filthy it all is. It's about the women out there. It's just the thrill of being in the States, you know. And about it was so knowing. It was about advertising. People weren't writing songs about it. You look at the chart in 1965, apart from things like Mr. Tambourine Man, they're mostly still boy meets girl, you know. And that when I'm driving in my car and a man comes on the radio, he's telling me more and more about some useless information supposed to drive my imagination. And when I'm watching my TV and a man comes on and tells me how white my shirts can be, and he can't be a man because he doesn't smoke the same cigarettes as me. That is a fantastic lyric. It's a
Mick Jagger,
really
surely
clever, brilliant lyric. The idea that there's the Stones and they're aware of all this pop culture around them and this different country and that they can't be conned. You know, it's a genius record. And the brilliant thing about it is it's the urgency in which it was done. It's a bit like She Loves You. She Loves You was written, I think, on a Tuesday or Wednesday, or whatever, and it was recorded, I think, 4 days later. You know, so 5 days before She Loves You was a record, as it were, as a recording. It didn't even exist. You know, it's that speed is so amazing.
That's part of the magic, though. I think the fact that they didn't have time to labour over it and fan about with it. They just had to capture it, lightning in a bottle, and it was all instinct. And you know, I think with a lot of these things, instinct will usually point you in the right direction. And it's when musicians have too much time to worry about it that things start to go wrong. Guns N' Roses' Chinese Democracy being an amazing case in point of why you shouldn't take 10 years to make an album.
How long did that take to record?
I think it did take about 10 years actually. In the end, it was a laboured procedure, and it was shit. It was shocking. Yeah. But the fact that they wrote these things, then they got straight in the studio and just banged it out.
Oh, I love it. There's quite a few examples. Lady Gaga wrote "Let's Dance." She gave this interview saying she had this terrible hangover, just woke up, and hangovers can be very creative actually. And she just in 5 minutes pulled this whole song together. The Beastie Boys wrote Happy Hour in a cocktail bar in New York, just written on a napkin, and came out, recorded it almost immediately. James Brown improvised What I'd Say live on stage, just improvised, and so that was the song.
Wow.
Crazy Little Thing Called Love, I think was supposed to be written in 10 minutes. Beyonce's Single Ladies, 20 minutes. Seven Nation Army, this is a really good example. The White Stripes were at a sound check in Melbourne and just came up with this riff. Those are the things, aren't they? But my favourite is Song 2, because the story of Song 2 by Blur was that they'd made the record and the record company had listened to it and they said it's fine, but as ever, we can't hear a single, can't hear enough singles or whatever.
That old chestnut.
They said we've got to go back and write another single. And so as a kind of joke to show the record company that they didn't care, were not going to be influenced by their opinion, and they banged this thing out that they just made up on the top of their heads with these nonsensical lyrics by getting your head shaved by a jumbo jet. Alex James claims he can't even remember it because he was so pissed. That is clearly mythological, but why not? And it was all done in, the whole thing from start to finish done in 30 minutes. They played at the record company. I think the record company would go, okay, we take your point. All right, okay, you're not playing along with it. And they said, that is a hit. That's fantastic.
That reminds me of that.
And it's just past 1 billion streams. So,
Have you seen that Flash Show sketch where they're all in a record company office in front of a record executive called Mr. Jones, and they're playing him their new single, feet on the table kind of thing, shades on. Yeah. And it's all, Mr. Jones, you're a wanker, you're a twat. And it goes on for that, like that for about 3 minutes. And the tape stops and Mr. Jones leads forward and goes, that's the single. Well done, boys.
It's
brilliant.
Took it on the chin.
Yeah.
Saw the bigger picture. That's fantastic.
I believe that Noel Gallagher wrote Supersonic while the rest of the band were having their chips, because they were trying to record their first single. I think it was meant to be Bring It On Down, which was eventually track 7, I think, on Definitely Maybe.
Yeah.
And it just wasn't popping for whatever reason. It wasn't working out. They were all getting a bit frustrated. So they break for some dinner. Noel goes into the back room with his acoustic guitar and it just pretty much falls out in about half an hour. They immediately get back to it. And the first take is what was released. So
really? That's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely astonishing. Just complete lightning in a bottle.
There's a lot to be said for it. Speed of the essence. Very good. Look, we must plug various things that we've done.
Yes.
Any other business we've done? Who have we done? We've done Dennis Greaves of 9 Below Zero, who was really good. I think that podcast is up. I love the fact that, I remember seeing Dennis Greaves in, I suppose it was about 1978, 77, and he was playing Tore Down by Freddie King with 9 Below Zero. And he's still doing it. He's still doing it in pubs, whatever, and clubs all over the country. What a good bloke. It was a good interview, that, wasn't it?
It was. He was really, really good. And I'll tell you who was really, really, really good. Peter Capaldi was astonishing.
Peter Capaldi, I think there's a reel up, which I hope you've all seen, just him talking about an incident in Grangemouth when they can't afford to pay the support band, who turn out to be a group who go on to be very successful. It's just so fun. He's so modest and funny and clever and such a consummate storyteller. And it's just lovely. And what I didn't realise with Peter Capaldi is that he'd been in a band for 6 years. It wasn't one of those things where, I'm in this kind of college band and we all put on some stupid clothes and take some pictures and have a single that gets played on John Peel. He had 6 years of banging away trying to make it. So it means a lot to him, that actually that part of his life was really significant and obviously would love to have done it. Part of the reason he's gone back to making another album now. But I thought he was just fantastic. And who else? We talked to David Leaf the other day.
Yeah, he's coming up.
About
Smile, wasn't it?
Smile, about the Beastie Boys Smile, that's a really interesting story too. Yeah, I mean, this is a guy who became obsessed with this record 50 years ago and had this kind of dream that he was going to move to California and meet Brian Wilson, become friends with him and collaborate with him. And all these things really came true. And he made a documentary about the making of Smile and he's just published this book about it. And it's just, there was so much information about it. And, what I didn't realize, I suppose, was that when Brian Wilson decided to shelve Smile, the great lost mythical Holy Grail rock album, it pretty much tanked the group. You know, he pulled the group out of the Monterey Festival. You know, this was just after Pet Sounds. They couldn't have been bigger. And then suddenly they as he put it, they went from being a band with a number one record to a band that nobody cared about in the space of a year. Whereas their great rivals, the Beatles, were just building and building and building. And it's just an amazing story, really. And very emotional. You know, there it is. There's a record that, you know, was shelved in 1965 and then eventually performed 37 years later in the South Bank. And I don't know, those kind of myths. And the other point he makes, which is that it's the myth of Smile, the great lost album, that helps bring about the rebirth of the Beach Boys, which it does, because, you know, whenever Brian Wilson gave interviews, the rock press would always say, and it's like Paul McCartney with I forgot what it's called now. What's the great lost Beatles track?
Yeah. Oh man, no, I'm having a mental block as well. You know what, listeners, I'm going to Google it.
Completely forgotten.
Carnival of Light. There we are. There it is.
Festival of Light, for God's sake.
It's okay, we're professionals.
As a senior moment, so for this festival, like, people still ask him about that. He always goes, how brilliant it is. Well, you know, the best thing to do is don't release it, and it'll remain brilliant forever after. But anyway, so look, that's those things are all out there for you to enjoy, as indeed are the various other things we offer. The weekly quiz.
Yeah.
Every
Absolutely.
Friday night, the international Word in Your Ear quiz, becoming a bigger and bigger thing, which you can join if you go to our Magic. Give them the details.
If you go to our Patreon, which is patreon.com/word in your ear, and as Mark says, there is the weekly quiz, which is a firm favourite in our community on there. Early access to content, a birthday present in your very own birthday podcast, amongst many other things, along many tiers of subscription. Please do visit and join our growing community of Word in Your Ear subscribers there.
Very good. And we'll see you next week.
This podcast was brought to you by The Word.